Well, good morning. This has been for some, this has been the third day. For some, it's your first time here. We just want to deal with a nice light topic for first thing in the morning. Something to just, ease into the day. No controversy whatsoever. Or maybe not. So our topic in this session is going to be the dangers of social justice. Typically, when when I do this talk, especially when I have a lot of people who I don't know their background, I usually have to give warnings and things like that. I kind of know most of the people here, but I'll still say if there's anything I say, if I use terminology that you don't know, please just feel free to raise your hand so I can define it. I try to define everything, but with this movement, it is constantly changing. And so language changes. That's part of what this movement is about. I'll give you the hierarchy of it. It's really, this is a global movement to destroy Western thinking. Okay? And so the idea of this that you see, because this is around the world now. I just got back from 3 weeks in the Philippines, and in the Philippines they're talking about being woke. And I did a similar talk on this, more focused just on the area of homosexuality in a pre-conference we did. Basically, we were all covering the issue of social justice. And I said in the Philippines, I'm amazed that they're talking about being woke. Because woke, if you have heard that term, it has the idea of people waking up to the racism that's systemic within America. And you go, well, wait a minute, it's tied to the African slave trade. When have Africans been enslaved in the Philippines? Never. And actually the debate that they're having is, why are we saying woke? Because they're realizing that's an American thing. This is how influenced this has been. Okay? And so this movement, its underpinnings is Marxism. You'll see that as we go through it. But Marxism has made many attempts in America to try to topple basically the Judeo-Christian values. And so in that, what we've seen is they've tried different things of using racism to try to bring everyone together, and that didn't quite make it as a uniting force where everyone would work against it and be global. And so they tried climate change. I'm sorry. It was global warming until we got into a cooling cycle, and then it was extreme weather, and then it was climate change. I told you about the language changing. Don't worry, we're coming back to where it was when I was a kid. We'll be talking about global ice age once again. And the solution will be the same. When I was a kid, we had global ice age coming and we needed government control. Then it was a global warming, and what did we need? Government control. Notice a trend. When they talk about the ice age again, they'll talk about government control. And so the racism didn't work, climate change didn't work, and so what we end up seeing is, what surprises me, what actually did work was pushing LGBT issues. And what you'll see is that they're now trying to bring all of this together. Okay? And so as we look at this, as we think about what social justice is, let me give you a definition. Social justice is also a concept that is used to describe the movement towards a socially just world, i.e. the global justice movement. In this context, social justice is based on the concepts of human rights and equality, and can be defined as, quote, the way in which human rights are manifested in everyday lives of people at every level of society, unquote. So as we look at this definition, we end up realizing that this is going to include the areas of economics, egalitarianism, even have views of taxation, redistribution of wealth, property redistribution. You're going to start seeing that, I think, coming up. There's, there is a movement. If anyone saw Elon Musk came out and said that he thinks that full self-driving will eventually be something that you'd be able to rent your cars out when you're not using it. It'll be good enough. It'll be better than humans. So he's pushing it and saying, see, you'll be able to just have someone call your car and you can make money while you're not using your car. And the left heard that and said, ooh, why do we need cars that people own? We should just have cars that are full self-driving, that instead of you making the money, it should be for the environment. Your car just goes out and does this for people who don't have a car. Right? And so now all of a sudden your property, your car, could be mandated to go and help people that don't have a car to save the environment so that they're not using a gas guzzling car. Okay? So when we talk about property redistribution, and so the driving force behind this is socialism, communism, underlying is all Marxism. Now, in case I don't get to it, Ed's going to remind me if I don't say why I am fully on board with reparations. So if I don't say that, if I don't talk about it, it's going to be Ed's fault for not reminding me, okay? Right, yeah. So, now I've teased you because you're going, wait, you're in support of reparations. I will. Some of you already heard it, so some of you are here already. Let's talk about what's called critical race theory. Who's here heard of CRT? Okay, do you know what CRT really stands for? You see, they call it critical race theory. It is properly defined, in my belief, cultural racism training. Because that's what they're doing. They're not trying to teach that we should end racism. They're actually saying we should have more racism just a certain way. Yeah. Okay? They claim that racism is in the fabric of society. So let's think about this. If it's in the fabric of society, can we do anything to fix it? No. See, this is the thing you're going to see with this movement. There is no end goal. This is why you see in the LGBT movement, it keeps morphing, because allowing homosexuality was not enough. Because once they had that, now you had to allow transgenders. Now you have to have interspecies. Bestiality is coming. How do I know that? I read the Bible. That's what it says will be the next stage. It's always been. When people give themselves over to this, that's what happens. And so the idea is that we are inherently a racist society. Now, it always puzzled me because we're a racist society because of an African slave trade. So my question always comes to the question of, is Africa racist? Because in case you don't know this, it was not whites who kidnapped blacks in Africa. It was blacks in Africa who had an African slave trade, and it was the blacks that went into the inner parts of Africa to kidnap people and then sold them to whites. So does that mean blacks are have the fabric of society that's racist? You see, they won't want to answer that. Because it goes against this whole thinking. Now I'm going to tell you right up front, if you're dealing with someone that fully believes in, the CRT movement, you'll find, by the way, that you'll get more accomplished by banging your head against a wall. At least you can feel pain. Something good comes out of it. Otherwise, you just really realize, why am I doing this to myself? But the reality is you can ask all the questions, all the logical questions, have all the good thinking you think to help them realize. But you have to understand that for people like this, truth does not matter. Amen. Narrative matters. It's all about the narrative. And so you can bring as much truth as you want. You could bring all the logic, and they go, that doesn't matter, you're racist. In fact, if you argue you're not racist, that proves that you are racist. Now, by the way, they can't be racists. The people that support CRT can't be racists. They would argue blacks can't be racist unless you're a conservative. If you actually believe in the Bible or believe in conservative values as a black, then you can be racist. But if you believe in CRT, you can't be racist. Now they say that the systemic issue is because of a white privilege. Now I find it interesting, maybe you guys can think back, there was a time that we talked about Asians having white privilege. And that changed from Asians having white privilege to hashtag Stop Asian Hate in 15 minutes. Because one guy that they assumed was a Christian because he goes to church, so they said he's Christian. He went into a massage parlor where he used to get more than just massages, and he shot up the place. And they were Asian. So all of a sudden, the Asians were able to be put into this critical race theory. Right? It took 15 minutes for all of the media to switch from saying, because literally that morning, I was watching CNN had a thing arguing how come Asians had white privilege. Now, why did they have white privilege? Because they have strong families, they have a good education, they have good jobs. Any of that have anything to do with the color of skin? No. But you see, this is the thing. When you're going to argue racism, you might be thinking the traditional definition of racism, that racism is based where you treat someone differently based upon color of skin or some, maybe if in Asians' case, the way their eyes look or things like that. Okay? So what you see is that definition has changed. How many of you have read the book 1984? Okay. I love Metzlick has a t-shirt says, he's got a couple, but I think he's got one that says, make 1984 fiction again. The other is, 1984 was not a operator's manual or user's manual, okay? The one thing when I read 1984 that I said, there was so much of it I could identify with and say I could see this happening, but the one thing I thought could never happen was the ability to change language quickly. It made no sense that you could just have a government going, well, this now means that. Well, I was wrong. Asians can go from white privilege to race, to being, marginalized just in 15 minutes, just because something happens in the media that fits the narrative. By the way, they've gone back to white privilege now that that's out of the media. And so racism is no longer about treating people wrongly because of the color of their skin. It's about people who are marginalized because they don't, I don't have it in my notes, but I have a meme that I saw that white privilege is defined as being on time. Being raised in a family where you have a father and mother that stayed together. Having a job that you've been at for most of your life. I think they define it as more than 10 years. Having an education. None of those things have anything to do with color and skin. In fact, I'll tell you this. You have plenty of blacks that fit into all of that. You have plenty of Hispanics that can fit into all of that. And you have plenty of whites that don't. There is something else that is common across this that no one wants to discuss. Fatherlessness. Where can we root this racism? By the way, we voted for Barack Obama because he was going to end racism. What you get in power with, you stay in power with. He made the division of racism even worse in America because he made everything about race, because that way no one would criticize anything he does. And so this movement of cultural racism training is about marginalized people, defining who is and isn't. But we see the fact of what they define as marginalized all can be rooted back in broken homes. By the way, in the black community, when did homes start getting broken down? If you think about it, because of actual racism in the South, blacks had some of the strongest families in America. That changed under the Carter administration. What happened? All of a sudden, the State Department discovered that there was a way for them to make a lot of money and fund their black ops by bringing drugs from South America into America. Yes, our federal government was doing that. They got caught. Okay? Of course, they got caught, and when they were caught, it was during Reagan's administration, so they were happy to make it seem like it was, look, Reagan was doing this, except the operation started under Carter. They had a problem because what are they going to do with their drugs? Who are they going to sell them to? They sold them in black communities, destroying black families. Which essentially, then they had, don't worry, because they had a means of helping. Oh, there's fatherlessness in the black communities. We will provide welfare. Keep voting us, and we will keep your welfare checks coming. Different kind of slavery. By the way, there is a party that has been the party in America that has supported slavery. There is one party that was the party of the KKK. There's one party that is the party that was against civil liberties. And there is one party that is the party that is telling blacks today, if you keep voting for us, we will keep giving you handouts. And it's the Democrat Party. So when it comes to reparations, I said that I am in support of reparations, and I am. I believe that every Democrat should have to pay reparations to all the blacks that were enslaved. And then all the blacks should pay every Republican the reparations back for fighting and dying for their freedom. If you want to have reparations, but their whole thing is, well, whites have to pay reparations. Well, based on what? San Francisco just tried this, by the way. They voted in reparations, and what happened was all of the blacks said, well, it's not enough. They want more money. And now all of a sudden they have people moving out of San Francisco who are the whites who have to pay these reparations, right? Yet San Francisco never had slavery because it wasn't a state at the time that slavery was free, right? And so what we see is the fact that you have people saying, you have people who in America, can we figure out today which blacks were slaves and which blacks were the kidnappers and the slavers in Africa? It's going to be impossible to tell. I talked with someone that was a social justice warrior, and he was telling me how, we should have blacks, blacks should have reparations. They had suffered. And I said, why should I have to pay you money? He says, because of what you're as a white man, what your generations have done. I said, but I come from Russia and Romania. My family never was involved in the slave trade in America. In fact, my family had to escape to avoid the anti-Semitism that ended up leading to millions of my generation, my parents' generation being killed in Nazi Germany. I said, so does that mean that people owe me reparations? In fact, when we look at it in America, when Jewish people were trying to escape Nazi Germany, the American government turned them away. Don't you think then every American should pay every Jewish person? But again, truth doesn't matter. What matters? The narrative matters. My narrative doesn't fit for their stealing. By the way, that's exactly what it is. It is the idea that we can take from people who have and give to people who don't, and that will make everything better. Ed, remind me if I don't talk about it, about the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Okay.
So if I don't talk about that, he's going to ask that as a question. So here's the tenets of, and I should really change all these to say, instead of critical race theory, I should change them to what it properly is. So if I say CRT, I'm referring to, cultural racism training. Here's the central tenets of them. It's based on this idea of intersectionality. If you're not familiar with that, I'm going to define that in a moment. Intersectionality and racism. But it's not the racism, as I said, that you think. It's a new definition of racism. It's a challenge to dominant ideology, okay? And what this is that when we look at laws and other concepts, CRT would say that we have to take into account, when we think about everything that's done, we have to take CRT into account. So we have to look at everything through a lens of who's being marginalized and who's not. They have a commitment to social justice, and we'll look at what social justice actually is. I gave you their definition of it, but we're going to look at whether we can actually have a social justice. What they define it as and what the Bible would define it as different. And that's why I think, as you're going to see as we go through this, everything in this movement is in contradiction to a biblical gospel. And that is why many of us, if you go out and search for social justice and the gospel, several of us got together. We were very bothered by this. This is back in 2017. We got bothered by this, social justice moving into churches, and we started to get together to figure out how can we address the dangers of social justice in the gospel. 75 of us wrote a letter to John MacArthur. Well, technically one wrote the letter and we all signed it. But we signed it asking whether he would put his weight behind this. We actually said that we thought it was going to be his last fight before he dies because he's up there in age. We were wrong because COVID gave him another fight. But we sent him a letter and asked whether he would support and back and promote a statement on social justice in the gospel. And so several got together. There were 19 that got together. I think it was 19 in the original drafting. They sent it to the rest of us. We put in our comments, and then we put out a statement on social justice in the gospel. And that's out there today, and thousands have signed that. I encourage you to go read it and see if you'd want to put your name to it as well. You'll see the 19 initial ones, and then you'll see the rest of us. Some people have been added on even though they weren't the original 75, but because I think it's because their names had weight. They got added to the initial list. But we see the danger that this presents to the gospel. Number 4 is the importance of experiential knowledge. Okay, we have a debate that we'll have here later today on the continuation of the charismatic gifts. Okay, and I'm going to say this: Matt Slick believes the gifts continued. Matt Slick, as I'm going to ask in the debate because I know his position already, he doesn't think that these are normative. Matt is not one of the wackos that lets his experience override his thinking. Okay? So even though Matt and I have differences with it, there's clear things with it. And I'm saying that because of what I'm going to say next. The way that the social justice movement has made its way into the church has been through the charismatic movement because of their experiential theology, their experiential worship. Everything with CRT is about experience. And so that is how it's weaved its way in. All right? Now, it doesn't mean that all charismatics are given over to that. It doesn't mean all charismatic churches are given over to that. But it is something that they were able to have in common. The other way I think that it has come in very strongly is through the SBC. You go, wait a minute, they're not charismatic. They're a conservative group, aren't they? But they're being funded by organizations that are being funded by men like George Soros. And once that money comes in, you don't want that going out. And so that has been another way that now it's really ramped up in recent years. And so you had people in the SBC that were saying, well, we have to vote for Joe Biden because, Donald Trump just has mean tweets. Well, the reality is that, he does have some tweets that we could say are mean, and we know Joe Biden's not the one that's typing the mean tweets on his side, but Joe Biden has said some pretty mean things, like Christians are domestic terrorists. So as Christians stand up and say, well, which do we want? Mean tweets that Trump actually admits, by the way, if you don't know, Trump has said the reason he does the mean tweets is because it's the only way the media will actually report what he does. Yeah. So in one sense, you go, well, that's kind of politically brilliant, but still, you shouldn't do it. You find other ways. There's other guys who do that without, find other ways to make the media report it. But like, is the mean tweets as bad as saying that Christians are domestic terrorists? Okay, remember, what they get in office with, they stay in office with. Right? Nazi Germany, Hitler got into office by blaming the Jews for all the societal ills. We have an election where Christians are being blamed because of CRT, being blamed for all the societal ills. And so number 5 is the use of interdisciplinary perspective. So what this is the idea that it takes different fields of thinking and brings them together. We're going to see this as we talk about intersectionality. It's the idea of bringing back all this nuanced language, nuanced thinking into one. So as we think about this, cultural racism training is an umbrella for several things. Intersectionality, that we'll talk about next, Marxist philosophy, cultural Marxism, deconstructionism, if you're not familiar with Rauschenbergism, and black liberal theology. In case you don't know, the person who influenced Barack Obama was his pastor, Reverend Wright, was less about the Bible and more about black liberation theology. That's what influenced Barack Obama. So let's talk intersectionality. So this is the idea of it, is the idea that there's these disadvantaged groups that exist. And because of that, oppression is happening because people are disadvantaged. So you have advantaged people who, but in their thinking, if you have an advantage, that automatically means you are oppressing a disadvantaged person. How do we fix this? Well, the way of fixing it is we have to put everyone into a group. So you have racial identity, you have gender, you have nationality, sexuality, disabled. Okay? Now let me explain how this works. So you have a person who is black. That gives them one intersectionality point. Okay? So that means they have a right to speak more than someone who is white because they have one intersectionality point. But if you have a black woman, now she has 2 intersectionality points. So she has more of a right to speak than just a black man. But you have a black woman who is a lesbian. Well, now she has 3 intersectionality points. So her voice needs to be heard more than the other categories, especially the white, those with white privilege. But now you have a black woman, lesbian, who's disabled. Well, now she's got 4 points. You see how this goes? And so the idea of it is that the more intersectionality points you have, the more your voice should be heard. Because the more points you have, that means that is the more disadvantaged you are, the more marginalized that you are. And so for each point, you should have more of a voice in society. And that will make everything equal. Okay? We're going to talk about the difference between equality and equity in a moment. But they'll talk about equity. And they'll say that means everyone's equal. Those words are different. But you know what? As we look at this, there's one interesting thing. As we end up looking at this, we realize that there's one group that even if you're black and a woman and disabled, and doesn't matter what your nationality is, there's one group that cannot have any intersectionality points, no matter your color, no matter your gender, no matter any of that, and that's Christian. If you are a Christian, it wipes all of this out. So now tell me, what is this really about? How in the world can churches bring this in and say, this is biblical? We're trying to have justice in the world. The goal of this is an attack on Christianity. You cannot marry this with Christianity. And so what you end up seeing in this is that they will argue that, no, we should have justice in the church. Justice properly defined, well, let me back up a second and ask a question of you guys. Where do we get justice from? What is the source of justice?
God. God's law.
More specific.
God's law.
Not God's law. God Himself, His nature.
Yes.
See, justice comes from the nature of God because God is just. That's where we get justice from. So when we look at what God's justice is God's justice, does the Bible, God's law, state that we have to pay for what others have done to someone? No, in fact, God's law states that we're not responsible for our father's sin. Mm-hmm. Right? What does cultural racism training say? That we're responsible for even my family who is never here in America during slavery. I'm somehow responsible for those who also weren't here in America when there was slavery, but they happen to be black and I happen to be white. I'm responsible for the sins that my family has never done, for people who never suffered. You see, this is an underlying thing. Now, are there wrongs that occurred during slavery? Absolutely. Slavery isn't new with America. Are there people even today who are mistreated because of color of skin? Yes. And though they argue that you can't be black and racist, the reality is what you end up seeing is right now there is a shift where whites are being treated by the proper definition of racism. And it's being accepted. Okay? It actually is an interesting thing when you think about the Marxist agenda because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What do I mean by that? Let me answer this and then don't forget your question. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy because of this. What ends up happening in society is as you have people that start to be really marginalized, people who are being told they can't have certain jobs because they're Christian, because they're white, okay? This is becoming a thing in Fortune 500 companies that they're being told that they have to hire either black, Hispanic, homosexual, transgender. They're not allowed to hire white people, white men. That's actually coming out more and more where the companies are stating that openly. Well, that's a racism. Okay? But what probably will happen, because historically this is what's happened, you're going to have people that are going to rise up. And where you have people talking about white supremacy, I think what you see is the behavior now of trying to show, we're going to show preferential treatment to another race will create more white supremacy. And it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. There will be people that will rise up, and try to fight it. And they'll be called, and whether they argue for white supremacy ultimately or not, that's what that will be claimed. Ed?
Yeah, so with all that said, I also find it ironic that the same thing that's happening to white Americans and white Europeans is also happening now with the Jewish people in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
In that all of these woke people are supportive of the Palestinian conflict and
yes.
being ironically very originally racist towards Israel.
So the question, I'm just repeating it for video, but the question that Ed is bringing up is the fact that you're seeing not just in America and Europe this being pushed, but you're also seeing it in Israel today ever since October 7th. I could do a full 1-hour talk on Israel. I'll break it down to this, just so you have some things to understand. Before 1948, there was a land known as Palestine. It was not a country. There never was a country called Palestine. There's no language of Palestine. In fact, before 1948, every Jewish person that lived in the land that we call Israel today was called a Palestinian. Let that sink in. Who owned that land? the United Kingdom when they took it away from the Turks in war. So it was never a land of the Palestinians. In fact, when the British took it over, they talked about making it a land for Israel, and a bunch of the Arab countries started sending Arabs in, the very Arabs who say that they've always been there. Now, there were Arabs there, and there were Jewish people there. They've always been there. But you had more that came in and said, oh, well, we've always been here. And so the land was given to Israel. That was something that was done by those who owned the land. It was never owned. There was never a country known as Palestine. But why is it that Israel are those that are the victimizers in this case to those in Gaza who are the victims? Even though Hamas is the one that started this conflict, that Hamas is the one that still has people who are in it. What was it? And this is what you're not going to hear. What was it, or where was it that they went after to go and kidnap people? At a rave. What is a rave? It is a place where young people get together, listen to music, do drugs, and one of the other things that's very popular in raves is homosexuality. You don't hear our media talking about the fact that they targeted the rave because of those things, do you? That's who they wanted to kidnap. They've kidnapped innocent people. Now, are there innocent Palestinians being killed in this? Absolutely, that happens in war. You know what? There'd be far less innocent people being killed, Palestinians being killed, if Hamas would stop hiding in areas and forcing people to stay in areas where Hamas is setting up, like in hospitals and schools. They could reduce the number. But again, truth doesn't matter. What matters? Narrative matters. So having people, Palestinians, die helps the narrative. Are the leaders of Hamas affected? No, because they don't even live in that Gaza area, right? They're in a different country. Somewhat safe and sound, but they're finding out maybe not so safe. Okay, so but it is the same thinking. Because those in Gaza don't have all of the things that they have in Israel, they must be victimized. And so Israel must be the bad guys. So the thing is where does this end? Where does this Marxist philosophy end? Well, the end game ultimately is communism, where you have the government take over, and you no longer have any freedoms. This is part of a Marxist atheistic philosophy, where they're going to attack all of the things that are the foundations to the Christian values. Start with the family and marriage. And then now, we have less people getting married now, I think, than ever. People everyone just sleep around. Why get married and then have to go through a divorce if it doesn't work out? You just separate, just walk away. Now we don't even know, not only do we have that, but we have people redefining what marriage is. You can get married people of the same gender. Now we don't even know what a boy and a girl is. Now, by the way, one of the things I find so interesting, if you ever talk to people that are transgender and follow it, I used to, for the sake of education, I tried to listen for several months to 4 different well-known transgender podcasts. I just couldn't take it anymore because every single one of them are just so overtly sexual. That's all they talk about. And they talk about, the rights of transgenders and justice for transgender, but they never get to that, it seems. But, the one thing I did notice is that every one of them, when they talk about transgenders, every guy who says he's really a girl, but they say transgender's fluid, there's one thing I always noticed in all of them. The biological male always tries to look and act like what they think a stereotypical woman is. And they tell you there's more than 2 genders. Well, I will believe it when you start acting like it. If gender was fluid, you wouldn't need to get operations to change your body. You as a guy wouldn't need to wear dresses and makeup. I mean, one of these podcasts, the guy was explaining as he's going through this transgender, he's saying, well, I didn't grow up learning how to wear makeup and put on pantyhose. So I need people to show me how to do this. Well, if gender's fluid, why do you need to do this? Because you know there's only two genders and you are trying to mix up and confuse what gender actually is. So they know there's only two genders. And where all this really came about, by the way, is it came through postmodernism, deconstructionism, right? The idea that there is no truth. You have your truth, I have my truth, so therefore we all can have these different truths. And so as we look at this, you know, one of the things we see that where it really affects the church is egalitarianism. This is the first step when you see in a church. The church comes in and it starts when we say, well, women could be pastors. Well, women should be allowed to, I mean, why can't women do anything in the church? Have any of you heard that before when it comes to this issue? Women can't do anything. Well, if you turn to Genesis chapter 1, something interesting maybe you guys haven't noticed in Genesis, but in Genesis 2, we have we have God telling Adam that he has all these trees in the garden. How many of the trees can he not eat of? One. Okay, so he can eat of, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, thousands of trees, but one he can't. Okay. So he knows that in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 3, we have the serpent come to Eve. And I want you to listen. A lot of people miss this. What is it that Satan says to Eve? He says this, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden. Notice that subtlety. So what does Eve say? And everyone gives Eve a hard time, but she gets it right. I'm going to show you why I don't blame Eve on this. But Eve says, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God said you shall not eat of it or touch it lest you die. Eve corrected Satan properly in the fact that, no, we can eat of all of the trees except one. Now everyone gives Eve a hard time because they say, but God never said don't touch it. But we don't know whether Eve was the one that created that. See, everyone says, see, Eve added to the Word of God. How do you know it wasn't Adam? How do you know Adam didn't go, don't even touch it, Eve? I mean, don't husbands do that to their wives? If you got to leave the house at 10 o'clock, you tell your wife you have to leave at 5 to 10, right? Don't even, we're going to give an extra caution here. No, I know, you husbands don't do that, I get it. I actually don't do that with my wife, but my father used to do that all the time with my mom. We were always told the wrong time when we had to leave the house. Right, so maybe it was Adam, but I want you to notice the subtlety of what Satan did. There's one tree they can't eat of, and he says, so you can't have any tree. So women can do everything in church except one thing. So women can't do anything in the church. Where is that coming from? Yeah. And so we see this, and Matt this week on his radio show had a woman that called in trying to argue, well, shouldn't women, isn't the issue that the command against women to preach, isn't that just cultural? And Matt gave her a statistic that he had studied, and he said, do you realize that 80% of the churches that accept female preachers end up accepting homosexuality? And she went, what? Yeah, because that's the stepping stone. That's why they push for egalitarianism. Not just political rights and social rights and economic rights, civil rights, but they want church rights. And so the idea of this is that we should have social justice. Now, proper justice would be that society, proper social justice would be that society is submitting to God's law. That would be social justice. But what they wanted to do is say, no, we're going to twist it and say social justice is the exact opposite of God's law, and that's what we should do. So we end up having issues where we're supposed to obtain equality in areas of systemic racism, which, by the way, if it's systemic, you can't do anything to fix it. So we should just accept it, right? If it's systemic. Income and wealth. So, Ed, thank you for reminding me about the Occupy Wall Street. I appreciate that. So now, how many of you know of Occupy Wall Street movement? Okay. How many of you believe that it started on a Thursday afternoon because of a post that went out on Facebook at 4 o'clock? There's a reason I don't believe that that Facebook post was the cause. You know why? 3 months prior, I was asked to attend the Occupy Wall Street meetings. So yes, I'm an insider. I do a lot of ministry in New York City, and they thought I could come in as a spiritual component. And so I attended to learn. I had lots of fun conversations. So the whole idea of this movement was that there's people with money and it's not fair, they should give to those who don't have. Now, they ended up occupying an area called Quasi Park in New York. And in this park, they set up tents. It was really interesting because now they would have daily meetings at 10 o'clock and everyone was supposed to have a voice. And so a really interesting thing that happened though, neat social experiment that the news never talks about, is the fact that what happened is you had all these rich kids who wanted to make a difference in the world. And so they would go there, but there were a lot of people that just, they were homeless, they were bored, they had nothing better to do, and they would just, hey, we got free food because a Soros nonprofit was funding food to be delivered. So they got food, they got tents, they got people to hang out with, something to do. Hey, let's do this. And you know what? All these rich kids have these things called iPads and MacBooks, and there's no locks on your tents. And so all of a sudden, one day, a bunch of the rich kids decided this isn't good. All our stuff is being stolen, and we have to go back to mommy and daddy and get new iPads and stuff. So they literally, without telling anyone, took everyone's tents and moved all of their tents to one section and moved the other people to a different section so that they could police their own. And then they had a problem because at the 10 o'clock meetings, things just weren't happening the way they wanted. So these, what I referred to as the rich, the upper class Zagati Park, they started having 9 a.m. meetings to discuss how they were going to force their agenda at the 10 o'clock meeting. I got kicked out finally when one Saturday morning I asked the question at the 10 o'clock meeting why it is that, and I referred to them as the upper class Zagati Park. I said, why is it that the upper class Zagati Park has meetings at 9 a.m. to discuss how to force the agenda at this meeting? I was no longer welcome at the meetings. I remember talking to this one girl who came in, she's on spring break, and she comes in and she's there because she wants to make a difference. She's going to college in Florida to get a medical degree, and she is a straight A student. She's got to be a straight A student because she's got a full ride scholarship because the scholarship is based on her grades. If she doesn't get A's, she loses her scholarship. So she's got to get the A's. And she's telling me it's not fair because there's some people who have money, you guys like Steve Jobs, and he should just give away his money. He has enough to live on. I said, but what incentive does he have then to make more products that you're using, because she had an iPad, that you're using to make the money to give to people? What incentive if you're going to take his money away? Well, he should just do it out of the goodness of his heart. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Do you go to school for medical with other students that work full-time or part-time to go to school? And she says, yeah, I'm sure I do. I said, do they get A's like you do? She goes, no. I said, why not? And she eventually realized, because they have to work. I said, so don't you think it would only be fair out of the goodness of your heart to give up some of your A's for their C's and you both get B's? She goes, I would lose my scholarship. I said, but out of the goodness of your heart, you should do this. And she says, but then I wouldn't get as good of a job when I get out. You know what the sad thing is? Nowhere in the conversation did she put the connection together. She could not see what I was saying. And I see you laughing. You've put it together. She could not. So the argument they make when they talk about equality, you'll hear them be specific about equity and equality. And these are different. Equality is what America was based off of. Equality is the idea that everyone should be able to have the same starting place. This was based out of the idea that comes from Europe, where you had the noble class and the peasant class. And a peasant could never be a noble. So you start out in life just based on where you're born, which class you're born in, that's it. You have no movement. And so what you end up seeing there is when America was started, it was based on the fact of the idea of equality, equality for all. Everyone starts the same way. So you have a race. Equality is the idea that everyone starts at the starting line at the same point. Equity is the idea that in this race we all end at the same point at the same time. And so if I'm running a race with Ed, well, Ed's got to get a head start. He starts about 3 feet from the starting line because he's got to run, and that's not going to work for him in the wheelchair, right? No. So the reality is he because of his disability, he has to start closer to the finish line than me. That's the idea of equity. Now I want you to think, does equity work? Can it ever work?
No.
You know why not? Who would be president in a land of equity? Everyone. That's equity. It's not that we have to vote for president. If the equity is going to be the rule, then everyone is president. Can you have a society that works that way?
No.
Nope. But see, as long as they don't let you know that, they can keep pushing this. So this ends up dealing with, they want to have this equality for LGBT rights, marriage rights, gender roles. You know what right I don't see there? Christian rights. Because all of this is an attack on Christianity. The LGBT are not, they sit there and say, oh, we're being oppressed, we're being marginalized, while they attack Christianity. Okay? You don't see the fact that in the same town where was the Masterpiece Bakers, the guy who went to Supreme Court because he wouldn't make a cake, he wouldn't make a specialized cake for a same-sex wedding. And by the way, it was discovered that the two people that wanted the cake specifically went to that shop because they knew he was Christian. They targeted him. And in that same town, there's Muslim bakeries, and not one of them would make a cake, and not one of them have been sued. You had a question?
I also noticed on your outline here that baby rights are not mentioned.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Rights of a baby are not mentioned, correct?
could you speak to how the social justice movement is very unjust towards the preborn?
Yeah, so the question is how the social justice movement intersects with the preborn.
Yep.
And this is right back to the destruction of the family.
Yep.
Okay? We should, I mean, really, what is abortion? Their founder, well, it's murder, yeah. But the founder said it when she initially set up Planned Parenthood. Sex without consequences. Why have sex without consequences? Because now, why get married? I can be friends with benefits. You heard that term? It's just, hey, we can be friends, we hook up for a while, we get along, we have all the benefits of marriage, but if things don't work out, we just move on. Okay? But children make a problem for that. Well, that's why they want abortion. Mm-hmm. By the way, glad you brought up the abortion. Maybe I should add this into this talk for the future. But The reality is, let me explain to you something of what abortion is. Like you said, it's murder, and it is. But what I do when I go to an abortion clinic and I talk to people, if I talk to people about abortion, I argue for slavery. And you see someone's going, what? You can argue for slavery. You know, go read the book 12 Years a Slave. Solomon wrote, the author who was kidnapped as a slave, he says that the first master he had, if that's all he knew of slavery, he would have thought it's a good life. He had a Christian master and things went well. His other one, not so well. Okay, but the thing is that slavery was not always, we always hear slavery of the worst of the worst. But slavery properly, as we would see in the Bible, would be one where you have someone that has a responsibility to take care of the welfare of someone who can't take care of himself. Now, the slavery you had in America where you're kidnapping people and enslaving them, okay, is not anything close to what the Bible is, because kidnapping would be illegal, and it wasn't because they can't take care of themselves, okay? But the idea of slavery would be that you have people, and we have this in our society today, people that don't know how to take care of themselves. They're on the streets, homeless. They struggle. They're called marginalized in the CRT world. And yet, what you end up seeing with them is that in slavery, someone has the responsibility. This is the idea in Europe of the noble class. They had a responsibility to take care of the peasants. They took care of the housing. They took care of the food. They took care of the health care. They had the role to take care of them and provide for them and pay them. Okay? By the way, slavery in the Bible, you got a half day's pay. So when people try to say that it's the same as the African slave trade, no, it's not. Slavery in the Bible, you are not a property. Okay? So, but what is slavery at its core? And the reason I argue for slavery is because someone will eventually say to me, it is wrong to say that you can own another human being. And I say, thank you. Now explain to me what is the difference between this is my property and this is my body. You see, there is a difference. Abortion is an ownership issue that ends in murder. Slavery is an ownership issue that is supposed to end in the welfare of the person. Sometimes it does not. Often it didn't, because humans are humans. But it didn't always end in murder. Plenty of slaves lived a long life. But they're both ownership issues. So where they will argue that we have a systemic racism because of slavery, they refuse to see what they're doing with abortion. This is why I said this earlier in the week. Matt Slick did a debate in Texas against an atheist, and so he did 2 nights. Matt's nuts, okay? If you haven't figured that out, he does two debates. Amen. He does 2 debates, 2 different atheists, 2 different topics, 2 nights apart. Matt has to prepare for 2 debates. These guys don't have to prepare for 1. Okay, so same group of people were around. We got to know. So Matt and I were, a bunch of us were, as Christians, we were evangelizing the atheists. We're talking to them, and so as we're sitting there and talking, Matt is doing a debate with David Smalley. I'm explaining to David, because his whole argument that he's going to make against Matt in the debate is all going to be about slavery in the Bible, and that's why it's that God is immoral, because slavery is in the Bible. And so in that, because I talked to him about abortion, I get up, I get to and there were other atheists at the table, and so we get up at the Q&A when other people can ask questions. I said, Mr. Smalley, do you think abortion is wrong? And his response was, oh boy, I'm glad I'm debating him and not you. Because he knew he had no answer. Everything he just spent 2 hours debating, if he sides that abortion is right, he knows he just lost everything he just said. So,
I'll make it real brief, but in addition to the issue of abortion, on the other end of the spectrum now that is really rising is euthanasia. And in the United States right now, and it's a denial of the Creator, that how He's created us, how He gives life, how He takes life. but here, I believe, the last time I checked, maybe 11, or it might even be higher now, of our states do physician-assisted suicide, and then also it's rampant in Canada, and
Europe.
in Europe, and for depression,
Yep.
disability, quality of life
Correct.
issues, and a merciful kind of, now it's extended in the Netherlands to children even under 6.
Yep.
And I think we're lowballing what this culture of death is
Yeah.
really going to look like under this system.
Yeah, so the question is with the rise of euthanasia, the culture of death, which doesn't stop with abortion, it's at both spectrums. And really, the reason is because everyone's being told, remember what I said, this is experience-based, right? I should just have my best life. When you remove God, this is where it comes from. When you remove God, what is your purpose in life? Self.
You become the God.
You become the God, yeah. This is why I've said for years, and some atheists are finally waking up to it, but I've been saying for decades that if atheists succeed in getting rid of Christianity, they're going to wake up to realize that they're now fighting against Islam, which they're working with to silence Christians. And when Christianity is silenced, they're going to suddenly realize Islam will win over atheism because Muslims are willing to die for something beyond themselves. And atheism is all about self. And so the whole thing is, when you break down the family, well, I don't want to have to take care of my parents. That's work. Just kill them off. I have a child with, mental retardation. I don't want to have to take care of them the rest of my life. Just kill them off. Okay, I forget which country it is that basically just accepted that any child with Down syndrome can be killed right after birth. Right? Down syndrome, that's too much work for me. So what is our authority as a Christian? Our supreme authority when it comes to social justice is Scripture alone. We're going to apply God's Word to the social justice issues of today. So we can look at slavery when it's used. By the way, we have a style of slavery today that we had in the Bible. It's called employer-employee.
Yep.
It's not exactly the same, but more closest it would be to the slavery that's described in the Bible that God had allowed would be that which happened in Japan in the 80s, where you'd have a company, and the company owned everything you owned. They owned your cars, your houses, your clothes. They took care of your education. They paid you, but you worked for the company, and you didn't leave the company because they owned everything. That's a similar type of slavery to that of the Bible. You got paid, okay? Difference with the Bible is after 7 years, you were set free.
Last question, I think.
I like how he says it. Last question, I think.
For this one. So, brother, if I were to play devil's advocate here, and somebody
Just play the opposite side. Don't advocate for the devil.
So, Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, it says, "Your male and your female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your country, and they will become your property.
Yeah.
You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly."
Correct.
So if somebody has a problem with that property language in Leviticus, how would you respond?
Well, first I'd have to look up the word for property there to
Right.
first see. We do see. Well, I'd want to look it up in the Greek, but in that case Hebrew. But the issue that I would see there is twofold. One, very clearly the law says that if a slave runs away, you do not return them as you would cattle, as property. Okay, so in description we see that there's that. In that passage, it's making a distinction between those that were Israelites, which would be freed after 7 years, and those that are captured by warfare. Okay, and so one of the things people want to do is take passages like that, they want to apply that to the slave trade of the African slave trade, and ignore the rest of the law that has to do with slavery, the laws for the master. Okay, so slavery, the idea of slavery was to take care of those who could not take care of themselves, right? So people who don't handle finances well end up going into a debtor's prison, go into slavery, and they earn their debt, and then they're set free, okay? And so the thing with this is that the difference that we're going to see is that when you capture a nation, now those people, they're destitute. You've killed off, especially if you've killed off all the men, and the women they have no way in that culture of taking care of themselves. Basically, if you leave them to fend for themselves, it's a death sentence. And so the God of Israel said that when you come into a land and you take that over, the people who survive, who now have no way to take care of themselves, the Israelites had a responsibility to take care of them for the rest of the generations. Okay? So the view that God has is not on the side of you can just take who you want. It is on the responsibility of the master to take care of those people who had been captured in warfare. And that's the reason why if you have an Israeli that marries someone who's a slave, so you get someone who doesn't take care of, he owes someone money, he sells himself as a slave, he's single, he marries a slave. He then has a choice at the end of 7 years. He can go free, but his wife and children are still the responsibility of the master to take care of for all of their generations. So he can either go free, or he can submit himself to be a slave of that master for the remainder of his life. So the idea of it is more on the responsibility of the master. Okay, so with that, I'm going to try to quickly just address this. As Christians, we are going to see that our view is that the solution to issues of social justice is the gospel.
Amen.
1 Corinthians 15, 3-4. For I delivered to you as of first importance, also what I've received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that He was buried, and He was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. We end up seeing is that the message that we have, which is quite mind-boggling, because as Christians, and I say this to people who practice homosexuality all the time, that they say that we hate them. I don't hate homosexuals. In fact, when people ask me what I think about homosexuality, I could honestly tell them I don't care. Because I don't. And then they'll say, what does God think about it? So I usually challenge them back and say, what do you think God says about it? And they say, God says it's a sin. And I can agree with them. They all know that He says it's a sin. Remember what I said about when we talked about defending the faith, that the unbelievers know God exists, but they're suppressing that in unrighteousness. Romans chapter 1. Right? Verse 18. They're suppressing that in unrighteousness. Well, why do they want to silence God? Because that's part of their suppression. So they could feel better about what they're doing. And so we have a gospel message. What do we want to tell those who practice homosexuality? Repent and believe. What does the Muslim want to do? Throw them off a building. Right? A Muslim goes into a gay bar, shoots up the place. The media blames who? Christianity. Right? And so the reality is that if you really want to see who's means violence for the homosexuals, it wouldn't be the Christians. It'd be the Muslims. But hey, they're willing to work with the Muslims, to end Christianity. Because the Muslims and the atheists are in one sense on the same side. They're on the side against God, as enemies of God. So what is the message we would have for people that believe and teach cultural racism training, CRT, very simple. That Almighty God is so holy that when we break His law, it has an eternal consequence. For every lie we tell, we rightly deserve an eternity in a lake of fire. For every lie, every sin we ever do, but God. But God came to earth as a man to die on a cross as a payment of sin on our behalf. He who knew no sin became sin that we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus came to earth, God in flesh, to die on the cross that people that practice homosexuality could be saved. Amen. What does it say in 1 Corinthians? When he lists a whole bunch of sins, including homosexuality, and such were some of you. Christ died for these sins. Whether you have lust for someone that's of the opposite sex or lust for someone of the same sex, Christ died for the sin of adultery, even if it's the adultery of the mind. That's the message we have. That we can't save ourselves. We can't do good works. We have to turn from trusting ourselves as a good person or trusting our good works and turn and trust Jesus Christ. That's the message for social justice. That's the message the Bible would have to address social justice. Turn to Christ and live. Let's take some questions in the few minutes we have left.
So, if I may, I actually heard you mention earlier a lot about George Soros.
Mm-hmm.
Very evil man, as we all know here, hopefully.
Well, unfortunately, his son is worse.
Oh, no.
Yeah, if you see the stuff going on now, it's his son that's running things.
Oh, dear. So, I think you mentioned earlier, let me know if I'm wrong, I think you mentioned that he also donated money to the SBC.
There seems to, he don't, well, see, what George Soros does is he has lots of organizations that he donates money to. So he doesn't do it directly. Megan Basham has got a new book coming out called, I think it's called Selling the Shepherd. I'll have her on my podcast. Let's see, I could tell you in a moment. I'll tell you when I'm interviewing her, but I'll be interviewing her on that book, and she's addressing this sort of issue. I'll interview her July 12th, so sometime after that. It takes usually a week of editing, so maybe by July 24th on the Rappaport, that podcast will be out, and that'll be a book that's coming out. I have a pre-release copy that I'm reading. But yeah, there's a lot of evidence that there's money that is filtering through organizations like that to organizations like the SBC and the sad thing is it funneled through their ethics committee. That's the ERLC, right? So it's like of all of the groups, it should have like put a stop to stuff like this.
So yeah, I guess what I was actually going to ask is like, how deep does that all go?
It's quite deep. I mean, if you follow the Southern Baptists, you've seen that they're putting up they've put up a couple years ago to say that CRT should be something that is a tool to be used within the church as far as deciding churches and leadership. You had last year the SBC voted to say that women could not be pastors, but they changed the rules so it had to go through 2 years of voting, and this year they voted it down. So now there's not a ban. The ban on to say that women could not be pastors, now that's opened the door for women pastors in the SBC. So just remember the statistics that Matt has, right? It's only a few decades before homosexuality will come in if things stay the same. Now, we can still pray because guess what? I mean, the SBC was going liberal, and it was a 20-year fight to get it to turn around. Could that happen again? Sure, God could do that, and we pray that He would do that.
Could you comment on this, Andrew, that one of the things I see happening perhaps more out of the charismatic movement is almost like a Christian nationalism, not the kind of where you're talking about getting in the public square as you did, and being an apologist, linking it to the gospel, but more that we're going to take over in 7 realms, the 7 mountains,
So,
or dominion kind of.
Yeah, so the question is about Christian nationalism. It's interesting because you're saying it's within the charismatic movement. I think it's less in the charismatic movement and more in the post-mill movement. Those that are post-millennial and think they're going to bring the kingdom in. Let's start by saying this. Christian nationalism is a term that the Marxists have come up with to attack Christians. All right, so first off, I personally don't think Christians should use the term Christian nationalism. Even if they're like, well, we'll take it and redefine it. Once you take it, that feeds into their narrative. Right? And truth doesn't matter. What matters? Narrative matters. So why feed into the narrative? Okay? And so the thing is that there's people who are saying on both sides. I mean, there is, and what you're referring to at the 7 Mountain Mandate is more what we call New Apostolic Reformation, NAR. Okay? There's a DVD out on the table that if you want, if you're unfamiliar with that, Justin Peters, I brought his DVDs that we resell that is a critique of the New Apostolic Reformation. Okay, so that's available if you're unfamiliar with it. And in that movement, I could see how they would be, because they're thinking they're very much like the post-mills, that they think they're gonna bring in the kingdom. And so what they've done is they've tried to redefine it and say that would it be good if nations around the world used God's law as their law? Yeah, that would be good. If nations were living by Christian values, that would be good, right? But we have to understand that the term itself is being used as a political tool, so that what they can do is they're running on a platform of Christians are the problem. If we just get rid of the Christians, everything would be good. There'd be equality everywhere. We'd have equity and everyone would be happy. And so, but these Christians are trying to force their views on us. Do you know anybody who's forced, any government law that forces everyone to go to church on Sunday? Yeah, I don't know that law. They say that Christians are in control. If Christians were in control, abortion wouldn't be legal, homosexuality wouldn't be legal, and everyone would be mandated to go to church on Sunday. Right? That would be, but we don't see that. But somehow as Christians, we're the ones in control. Just because a Christian was based on Christian values. Now do you see, let me bring it back, now do you see why racism has to be systemic to the nation? Because what they blame for systemic racism is Christianity. They'll say, yes, it was based on Christian values of racism. Right? And yet, there were many Christians that were fighting against it. Many Christians who gave their lives to fight against slavery. They forget that those Christians, there was a different Bible in the North and the South. If you haven't read the Slaver's Bible, there's a lot of it was taken out, like you shall not kidnap people. Okay, that was removed, and so what we end up seeing with Christian nationalism is that the Marxists are using that as a way to blame Christians for all the ills of society, so that, as I have been predicting for about 30 years now, there will be another Holocaust. It will be in America, but it will not be the Jewish people. It will be Christians. And the idea of Christian nationalism is no different than what Hitler did in Nazi Germany, to argue that the Jews were the blames for all things, and then what ends up happening is Jewish people couldn't have certain jobs. Just like Christians are being told today, you can't be a judge if you don't accept homosexuality, because you can't be fair. You can't be a teacher. You can't adopt children. Certain things in society, Christians are being told, you can't do this. What are those things? Things that would have anything to do with a politician, having anything to do with laws, or training up a next generation. Okay? History will repeat. Now, ever since October 7th, I can say that it's probably going to be Jewish and Christians. They'll both be lumped in. But the reality is that that's where we're headed. I've said when Barack Obama was president that whoever came after Barack Obama, I thought that we'd have someone who is to the right, and that happened. And I didn't know who it was back then, but I said whoever comes after that, and when it was Trump, then I was really sure that whoever came after that, which turns out to be Trump, that whoever comes after Trump, I just thought it'd be 8 years of Trump, would take this country so far left that we'll never recover. And we will see if I'm right in a few months, okay? But when the Democrats say that democracy is on the line, they're right. It's just that they're the ones that are, taking the laws and throwing it out. And so the issue we have here is that the Marxists want to destroy society, the Christian society. You notice the Marxists are not going into the Muslim nations and trying to push this there, right? It's only in the Western nations that have the Judeo-Christian ethic, okay? And so, but our message is the gospel.